A quick hello and we're good to go. Welcome to the show, Dawn Anderson.
I'm not singing back, Jason.
No. I do have a great memory of sitting on the beach in Brighton and I made a song up for you, completely new, and you just looked at me as though I was totally mad. And I felt very slightly embarrassed, but it stayed in the show. So if anyone wants to listen to that, it's a podcast episode from Brighton with Dawn, which was phenomenally interesting, as all these conversations are.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. Well, we're going to talk about co-occurrence, a word you introduced me to, a very simple word that I probably already knew, but the meaning of it in this context, in the context of SEO, is really super duper interesting. And I do love this topic. But before we start, I was looking up Kalicube Tuesdays, and we're getting more and more knowledge panels, and they're getting richer and richer. And this experiment with WordLift of triggering knowledge panels using events is becoming what I had hoped it would be. And it's taken a year. We're at the year's anniversary. I thought it would be much quicker. But now we've got this, which is more, and you can go through and you see a list of Kalicube Tuesdays all linked to this particular event with Dawn Anderson. So I'm really pleased about that. It's moving forward quickly. And now onto your brand, SERP, where you dominate with your Twitter and your photos. And lovely brand, SERP. Bertie is down there in 4th place.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue it might want to be higher, but then that's me being difficult and pedantic about it. But then I did this and I searched your name and I looked at the results, and we've got teenagers from, I can't even read what it says there. Teenagers, so it's a horror film. And I was thinking, what? Yeah, and it's actually a woman called Dawn Brander. And I was thinking, why is that coming up? And the answer is because she was married to somebody called Anderson. So presumably her name at one point in her life was Dawn Anderson. Mm-hmm. And Google's made that association. I found that interesting because the knowledge graph over time, it's managing to get a better grip over time, except for the fact that if you don't know she was called Anderson at one point in her career, it doesn't make sense that that would come up.
Yeah. Different databases clashing, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, from a user perspective, you kind of think, well, Google's being really clever, but it's actually being quite not very clever at the same time.
No, exactly. It's not actually being very clever at all.
All right, okay. I was trying to be polite to Google. But there is that thing of, as they push forward and they say, we're understanding the world incredibly well, there are lots of these kind of quirks that come up. And I think there's a lot of criticism in the industry about them. And I would argue it isn't really very fair, in the sense that Google are trying to deal with masses of unstructured information, trying to make sense of it. Of course, they're going to get it wrong sometimes.
Yeah, I did a talk last year at Friends of Search in Amsterdam that was around equiprobability, connecting the probable dots. And that looked a lot at where structured data ends up colliding with each other. So they don't know which one to pick. So they end up making a mashup of a few of the wrong things. Like there was an example where Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles head was on Michelangelo. So if you did a search for Michelangelo, it showed a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. There was another that had extracted Vanilla Ice's death, even though he's still alive. There's quite a lot of examples where they pull data from different pools, pull it together, and it doesn't quite all match. So maybe it's some of that.
Well, I mean, maybe they're just being a bit over ambitious right now because they really want to push this forwards, and they're willing to take the hit of being looking a bit foolish sometimes. I mean, the thing about schema markup, do you consider that a lot of us are being us in the most general sense, are being over complex about it, putting too much out there and getting it wrong and just confusing the machine more than we help it?
No, I think if it's wrong, it'll probably just be ignored anyway. So I don't think it'll be confused. I think it's like a bit like when you put the canonical in and then you redirect the page that you canonicalize to. Well, it's just ignored. The canonical chain is just ignored. It's invalid. So I think rather than confusing things, I think we end up maybe invalidating things by accident.
That's a really good point. Sorry, I mean, the fact that we state something in schema markup or even in text, which is what we're going to be talking about today, can sometimes make Google think, oh, actually, I'm not sure about that anymore, invalidate it, and it's removed from the knowledge panel. And there's a lot of discussion around in my little world of people saying, oh, this has disappeared from the knowledge panel. And I think a lot of that is lack of confidence because of contradictory information.
Or it's just incorrectly marked up, for instance. Presumably, you know, it's a bit like any coding language. If you mark it up wrong, it's probably just not going to render anything. So, you know, it's right or wrong. It's very black and white. Correct, incorrect. Ignore it if it's incorrect. So maybe there's quite a lot of that going on.
Right. And then if we move into,
I was going to say, particularly when people try and move towards connecting linked data, I think the chances of it becoming more and more problematic and less valid increases because more noise, more room for error, etc. You know.
No, I think that's a really good point. It's something I've been kind of pondering and thinking about, and I'm really happy to hear somebody say something along those lines that makes me feel that, yeah, the more we try and make all these connections for the machine, the more likely we're going to make those connections incorrectly, and that perhaps being a little bit less ambitious wouldn't do us any harm. In some cases,
perhaps, but I think it doesn't do any harm to be ambitious. Sorry, Mike. The sun turned the screen down. Then here I am back again.
Right. So no, I mean, yeah, it's a great debate for me. Is saying, should I push further or should I be less ambitious and just try to be incredibly clear? I suppose is what I was trying to say.
I think there's nothing wrong with trying to be ambitious, but at the same time, make sure you get the fundamentals right first. You know, it's like anything, isn't it? Get the fundamentals right and then build on that and build on that. And it matters less if you're getting things wrong further down, particularly if it's stuff that search engines don't even support at this stage. So there's a lot of like beta markup, for instance, that it's not going to really do you any harm, at least if you practice and get it wrong, because you're not opted anyway, you know.
And maybe actually getting your copywriting right so that Google actually understands what you're talking about might be a better target.
Well, exactly that. And sometimes I think we can end up layering so much structured data on to really poor content in the first place. It's not going to, you know, it's like, I was going to use a sweary analogy then, and I think the English would know. It's like polishing something that's not very good.
Oh yes, I'm terribly prudish, so I'm very glad you kept that one slightly not direct. But yes,
it's like however much you mark up a page that doesn't have good information, it's not really gonna do you any favors, is it?
Brilliant. No, wonderful. And then we would move into the idea of the content. Then you say, okay, I've got this content and it isn't very clear and all the structured data in the world isn't going to save it. I need to be looking more at actually what's written in the page, look at the content, which is actually what people see. And kind of that hopefully segues into the idea of co-occurrence and how we're writing and how we're expressing ourselves and how the machine perceives it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, moving towards that direction in the conversation, I'm a huge fan of one target. You know, one target. I'm not saying build a page for every single query you're after, no. But when it comes to head terms, for instance, one target per intent is my advice usually. And I see a lot of the time people competing with themselves too much. You know, they try and create too many pages that compete on the same intent. They think, oh, we must meet every single informational need, but they don't realize you can do that often in one great page per intent, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, so rather than looking at the different keywords, looking at the intent of the query, and it's something kind of an industry we've been maybe fighting against or fighting with or fighting towards over the last few years, of getting away from the idea of keywords an exact match and saying what's the intent of the user and how can I address that.
Yeah, but you still need words. And I think I think a lot of people just think, oh, we don't need the words. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you need very few words. Like on a brand homepage, you're not going to need masses of words because it's brand homepage. It's like the front door of the shop. You don't need to necessarily have huge amounts of words on the front door of a shop, do you? It's a brand
open.
homepage. What's that?
Just the word open and your brand name and you're away.
Exactly. Maybe your top departments or, it's really more of a kind of it's like a navigation page almost, isn't it? It's like, this is us, we're here, and this is what we do type thing.
Yeah, I mean, that homepage, I think we often forget, it's not a destination in and of itself. It's a route through to another page on the site. Because once you're on that page, I think we need to, as marketers, say, where do I need to lead the user to? How can I help them get where they want to go?
Yeah, I agree. And apart from on really big competitive head terms, where actually it's often the homepage of a site that's only the one that's strong enough to actually compete with everybody else.
Which creates a problem, a parallel problem, which is you're saying, well, actually the homepage should address the brand and it should address where the user wants to go, but you're forced to put all this content on forced to rank for that head term. Yeah,
I think a homepage is great for, this is the brand and this is the big thing that we do. Yeah. This is the massive thing that we do. Where I don't know, a hat. We sell hats. Yeah. So example, hats. Yeah. So it's not super competitive that. I think it's something that's, I don't know, something ultra competitive that actually, when you look at it, if you see all the competitors are just ranking their homepage, it's because that's kind of, this is what they are type thing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's that, the big thing as opposed to, I mean, hats is maybe not, wigs wouldn't have been a better example, and nor would glasses. But we know what we're talking about. Now, onto co-occurrence. I mean, I remember you telling me that term and me thinking, I don't see what that really means in the context. Can you just explain it in words of less than one syllable that I would understand?
Well, it's back to the old, you shall know a word by the company it keeps. It's like words that live together, words that add context, words that are kind of share similarities with other words, etc. And not even so much words that you shall know a word by the company it keeps now, but you shall know a concept by the company it keeps. You shall know a thing by the company it keeps. I think that's all kind of just moved on a lot more now, especially with some of the integrations with the knowledge graph. Yeah. Just in the world, things that are similar and connected tend to live together. That's it.
Yeah, no, and it is an incredibly simple concept that we get naturally as human beings, but when you actually look at your text, you kind of think, well, actually, I'm not bringing all these words together to create what Bill calls a context cloud, to create something that's really, really clear. But one thing I'm terribly intrigued by, I mean, you were a big you were talking a lot about BERT, and your company happens to be called Bertie, which, if I understand correctly, was just a piece of luck.
Yeah, it was, because my dog's called Bert.
Right. Okay. You didn't call him Mum?
No, I'm Mum. I'm Mum to Bert.
So we've got Bert, now we've got Bertie's mum, and Bertie's mum is Dawn Anderson. And somebody said it's 1,000 times more powerful than BERT. Is that an exaggeration?
Yeah. Sorry, I hope you can't hear my husband on the tap.
No, we're fine. We're just terribly intrigued and interested to hear, is Mum really 1,000 times more powerful?
Right. So Mum is months to years away. Yeah, so that's really important.
Right.
I think a lot of people think that Mum is BERT, but bigger. If you look, Mum is not like BERT. Mum is like BERT in that it uses the transformer architecture. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Right, okay.
So actually, it's the transformer architecture that's the secret sauce. Yeah. BERT is just the way, for me, that Google has kind of said, it made it easy for us to understand. Like BERT, it uses the transformer architecture, and the transformer architecture has the whole transfer learning thing going on, which is where all the learnings go through all the parameters, and so, in unsupervised learning, and just all the learnings are fed forward continuously, so it's constantly learning. So I think it's going to be something a bit more like T5, which is BERT, but like BERT, but much bigger, more powerful. Maybe an ensemble of something like T5 Roberta, which is the Facebook, more robustly trained BERT. T5 was trained on what they call C4, which is a huge cleaned dump of the Common Crawl, 7 years of web data.
Wow.
The web. And the difference between that and BERT is obviously BERT was trained on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia is not natural language, really, is it?
No.
I mean, it's very structured.
Yeah.
It's got all these headings. It's very well connected. Whereas the normal web is the Common Crawl. So
yeah, it's our rubbish writing without any structure, because Wikipedia forces you to have structure because that's how Wikipedia functions.
It's not very natural. In that, it's more natural than manually labeling up corpora, but it's less natural than the web. The web at large is the only way you're really going to understand conversational search, natural language per se.
Right.
So I think it's a long way away. For me, it all connects back to 2018 when Google said, this is the next 20 years of search. MUM is around connecting not just words, but different media around task-driven search, yeah?
Right.
And it's not going to be easy. So it's video, it's images, it's everything around tasks in a recommender system. So it's different, yeah?
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's really, really, really interesting distinction that I think a lot of us are missing. The fact that it's not here yet. I mean, I immediately thought, wow, this is a great new toy and how fun this is.
It's months to years away. It's so computationally expensive. They can't even efficiently run BERT without having to break it all up into pieces and passages. Yeah, it's too expensive. They're only just really starting to work out ways in which you can run more efficient models like Albert and DistillBERT. And I saw something the other day that was about hashing and hamming. Hashing and hamming, yeah, making hashes of paragraphs and passages in BERT to kind of make things really small. Yeah,
you mean breaking it down into little chunks?
Hashes, yeah, little hash tables, yeah.
Right, which is, I mean, immediately brings to mind the indexing system using shards. Of saying the reason they can index such massive amounts of data and access it so quickly is because they break it down into manageable chunks that are related to each other in a way the machine understands, so it can access it quicker.
Yeah, well, yeah, similar. I mean, they use hash tables as well for that.
Right.
So
I mean, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it was a complete equivalent. I was just saying it makes me think of that. And
well, this was something I actually saw on Twitter the other day, actually. It was about hamming and hash layers. It was really quite new. Let me share.
Do we have a hashing hashtag?
Let me share it there with you. Yeah, I was just looking at it and I had it up on my browser the other day. It's quite new, and I mean, they're at that stage where they're trying to find ways in which they can like consolidate and make things smaller to be more efficient in the first place. So they're a long way away from MUM. I think MUM is a great concept, and I can see that actually it's kind of moving towards this whole like the user is the query, etc. Just that whole like queryless, etc. So
right, I'm just showing now the screen for the hamming, which I think is amazing. And we're looking at Ikuya Yamada, who's talking about neural passage retrieval with substantially reduced memory size. And he's got a diagram saying hamming distance, which is delightful. And I think, I mean, I'll share this in the program notes, but that link to that Twitter Twitter, whatever it is, conversation. It's the kind of thing that you start digging down into, and it's a rabbit hole you never get out of for the rest of the day. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. And I think once you start to realize how many challenges there still are in that space, I think it's just really easy to think that BERT is a done deal if you're not really looking at that space too much. But in actual fact, it's ongoing, and there's huge amounts of challenges to overcome. The long form content is the big problem as well. For instance, how do they rank full documents with this? Because ideally this would be applied to every part of search. I know that they've said, oh, well, we're applying BERT to everything, but in reality, it's probably looking at the second stage of ranking. The later ranking stages where they apply this is kind of more expensive methods.
I'm sorry, the later, I mean, I actually half missed a lot of that because I was desperately trying to sort out my screens because the computer was crashing. But you're saying that all of this expensive technology is being used in the later stages just for that final touch, the cherry on the cake?
I would say so, yeah. I would say so. And
right, which is important to bear in mind. I mean, the idea that Google are going to apply these expensive technologies to the entire mass of everything they collect is, I think, something I would have thought of, but very naive.
Well, the fact that, I mean, they have turned around and said, oh, we apply it to nearly every US English query. Well, that doesn't mean that they are using it to retrieve everything in the first stages. Yeah.
No.
Particularly, I mean, every query nearly, apart from maybe true navigational ones like brand searches, they probably won't even need it for that, because navigational queries presumably are so obvious that they wouldn't need any kind of expensive machine learning to work out where people want to go. If they said the word Apple, well, they might. They might actually for Apple. I used a really bad example there because actually.
What is delightful is that my little niche of brand SERPs is not costing Google very much money. And I said it to Glenn Gade the other day, brand SERPs don't get as affected by the updates as most other areas.
They're easier to it's pretty obvious where people want to go.
Oh, right. So, yeah, so I've picked the simplest niche in the entire SEO universe. Thank you very much. Quick message from Alessia Krobka, who says, lovely to see you, Dawn, talking about BERT and MUM.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
So back to actually the topic. We've actually got through to 25 minutes without talking about the topic, which was the confusion aspect of co-occurrence. And if I understand correctly, you were going to talk about the cannibalisation of co-occurrence, or am I mistaken?
Yeah. I think part of the challenge is people often I see the wrong page ranking on a lot of brands, and a lot of the time it's because of I find invariably it is because of misunderstanding of which is the best page to choose from a cluster of candidates. Yeah. Now, obviously, Gary's spoken about this quite a lot of times, clustering and similar pages being clustered together, and it's in all the academia, etc. When you have a candidate group, you gather them all together, and then you just pick one. Yeah. So often I see that tends to happen when there's quite a lot of crossover between topics. Yeah. So, and a lot of dynamic content is the challenge as well. So you'll have maybe a hotel that is suitable for, I don't know, romantic getaway, but it's also suitable for walking trips. Yeah. Some of this crossover I find actually can cause what I call just co-occurrence confusion, where you end up with the content that's connected to those pages kind of all becoming a little bit mashed up, really, the topical confusion. Yeah. It's even worse when you have very similar, I always use the example of plumber and heating engineer. Yeah.
Right.
Where and bathroom fitter, plumber, heating engineer, and bathroom fitter, they tend to often be the same sort of entity that does those jobs. Yeah. But they're different names for the same things. Yeah. So you'll end up with people maybe having a category for each, but actually the chances are each of those are cannibalizing each other. So I often find if you cluster those together, every one of them suddenly is well, the big one is suddenly much stronger than all those parts which were cannibalizing each other, if you like. Co-occurrence, confusion, yeah.
And you're saying, sorry, so a lot of this is to do with bringing these things together that we have been traditionally in SEO saying, well, this all belongs separately. It actually belongs together because the intent is the same.
I think it depends on how many of that entity you have. Yeah. So if you've got masses of X, masses of hotels, romantic hotel trips, yeah, and you can build a really great collection, and you can make sure that in that category, really, there's not a huge amount of crossover with the walking hotels per se. Not too much anyway, yeah. There's naturally going to be some crossover, but when it becomes too much, I think what tends to happen is you steal from yourself. You're stealing,
right?
Because go on.
My question there is it comes back to actually, is it because our intent as human beings, or what we're trying to, what the page is presenting, makes sense to us as human beings, but doesn't necessarily categorize itself sufficiently clearly for Google? And is the solution for us to write more clearly and categorize more clearly in our own heads what we're trying to serve, or are we going to have to maintain that ambiguity and simply focus on one particular point, but keep the ambiguity for the people?
I think the main point is if you are aware of it, you can write to keep it much more, either merge if you haven't got enough of a thing, yeah, merge and cluster together, yeah, if you have enough, yeah. If you have enough, then write with real clarity and keep things largely separate, yeah.
Yeah, I think writing with real clarity is something most of us have a great deal of problems with, because what we think is clear isn't necessarily clear to a machine. I mean, the idea the machine doesn't have imagination, it doesn't have culture, it doesn't have a sense of humor, and it doesn't understand poetry. So there will be common words.
There will be common words that will go with certain themes. Walking holiday is going to be things like, I don't know, maybe you'd have muddy boots. You'd be talking about things like, I don't know, muddy boots. I don't know, your dog. Hills, tired. Well, yeah, hills, routes, kilometers. I mean, you'd have that anyway in hotel search, but
you'd have paths, not roads.
Paths, trails, etc. Whereas romantic break would be love, Valentine, hearts, whatever. Yeah.
Yep. And you know, yeah, meals in the restaurant, romantic meals. Oh, I like all that. That's all delightful. Picnic in the trekking one. Sorry, I'm getting excited about writing.
That could be both, couldn't it?
Oh, very good point.
Yeah.
But
then I think that's where really strong, really clear anchors are useful, massively useful throughout a site. And I think a lot of people still don't get those enough. They either get them too much and they go nuts and they just almost like spam, or they get them, or they don't get them enough and it's all they all click here, read more, etc. In fact, funnily enough, I saw something the other day which seemed to be quite a bold row that was going on in the IR space that I was watching, where somebody who was a really notable IR researcher was talking about how PageRank was less important to Google than the anchors, you know, the anchor text, because the anchors are actually much more powerful. I'll find it if I can. It was a raging debate. They were all going on, and I'd have to dig it out, but it was on Twitter actually.
Right. Oh, you like Twitter. And would kind of the idea of saying, well, if I can get my words of co-occurrence and the things that really make clear the context that I'm talking about into my anchor text on the links, I'm going to be better off?
I think it helps a little bit with I think it helps with co-occurrence. avoiding co-occurrence confusion. I think the anchors are a really good way to help with disambiguation. Yeah.
Because I mean, an anchor basically says this specific aspect of this topic is dealt with over here. Follow this link to find it.
Exactly, and that's one way to kind of start to separate things out. I mean, it's hard when you do have topics that share really, really, really common themes and common words like gas fitter and plumber, because they are literally used interchangeably a lot of the time. Or
would you not end up with a context cloud or list of co-occurrent words for one and another, where in fact just one or two would be different, but that could be enough to distinguish between the two pages?
I think it depends. Sorry,
it always depends. No, brilliant, wonderful. I mean, I'm thinking as well.
I think it really does depend that, because it's not just about the 2 pages; it's about all the other signals, the legacy signals, the cruft. If you've changed the name of it over the years, or what other content do you have on that topic in the site, etc. What's pointing to it?
I really like the point about legacy signals. I mean, if we can dig into that a little bit, how important are they? I mean, all of this legacy stuff that Google's got in its memory, let's say, how hard is it to get away from that legacy? Sorry.
I think it can take a long time to get away from legacy. When I look in Search Console on a number of projects or any project, if a site's older, you'll find URLs that are visited that are ancient. You're talking 5, 6, 7 years ago, and I think obviously we know that there is a measure of importance in priority and crawling. There's these whole stacks and queues going on, etc. So sorry, my phone there. Oh God. Switch it off. Apologies there, Jason. Thankfully,
I hope it wasn't the gas fitter ringing up to come round and fix your gas fittings.
I think there's an awful lot of legacy that people just think, oh, well, that was in the past, but it's never in the past, because once something's been visited, it's part of the makeup of that site.
Sure. Which brings us nicely back to Dawn Brander, who was called Dawn Anderson at one point, and therefore gets this confusion with your name. That legacy is terribly, terribly visible there. And you're saying, well, you can't ignore your past, however far away it is.
What you call Dawn Brander?
I think it was Dawn Brander. I honestly can't remember.
What, I get a lot of clicks for the query Dawn Marketing. So I wonder whether Dawn Brander, Dawn Marketing, due to be married to Anderson, Brander, Marketing.
Oh, wow, Mo, Google's starting to make some very interesting connections. That's an interesting point as well. Is Google starting to go a bit mad?
Well, I think the more they rely or try to rely on natural language, the more probability determination and prediction comes into it than like Boolean, like is the word there or is it not there? Or I remember I was doing a video that talked about lots of synonyms were just all this, all that, all the other, kind of bitwise and pairwise type approaches, where if it's this, so I think I had a picture somewhere of it that I'd taken before. I don't know, I can't find it now. But anyway, ultimately we're saying something like, I think it was General Motors or GM something meant this, all the other. So I think the more they move away from those, which are Boolean type queries, to guessing, in a way, the more they can slightly get it wrong.
Yeah, which is a beautiful way to end it. I mean, I would have loved to have talked about the probabilistic blue, whatever that word would be. But I'll have to have you back for that, because that's definitely worth a 40-minute chat like today was. Thank you very much, Dawn. That was absolutely delightful. I love the idea that as Google moves away from the binary true-false idea of things. It's going to spread its wings and sometimes look a bit foolish, and maybe we could cut it a little bit of slack and not be too rotten with it. Next week, Hannah Thorpe will be here, strategy, tactics, or just doing stuff with one F, which I noticed just as I was putting this up that we've done the design with one F, but it makes sense if you say
I thought that was on purpose, Jason, so.
Yeah, well, I would like it to have been, but it's just me being kind of inattentive. So strategy, tactics, or just doing stuff works a treat. How lovely. Thank you very much, Dawn. A quick goodbye to end the show. Thank you, Dawn Anderson.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Oh, I've got to click the end button because I'm dealing with it. Oh, dear.